Okay, so thus far we've talked about ACEs, we've talked about gamma, sRGB. You kind of have some context for why that exists. And now we've talked about LUTs. Now you have everything you need to actually go inside of Houdini and put this all together to make a better render. Now there's more terms and fancy things that I want to teach you, but before we get to that, let's actually do the hands-on example so that you can see all of this happening in action. So now it's high time that I introduce you guys to Hubert the Hawk. He's my friend that will teach us all about color management. He's a scan I found online at Sketchfab, and just an asset that I brought in from online. And don't worry about following along yourself for right now. Just watch what I do, okay? So Hubert's cool and all, but right now he has a problem. He looks super ugly. He's grayed out. He is kind of not listening to the light properly. The light should be this afternoon looking thing, but it looks not afternoonish. Kind of looks like this weird pale light. Anyway, I can go on and on. Poor guy is just really ugly. That's because we haven't done any color management. I don't have OCIO going on. I don't have linear workflow happening either. So we have a snapshot right here, and we'll want to compare the before and after. So first things first, load in OCIO, which brings in ACEs and that wide color gamut, right? So we go to Edit, Color Settings right here, and I have the OCIO config right there. So now Houdini understands color and a much wider gamut. That gives our lights more information to work with. Now our lights should behave much better. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, and so far nothing seems to have changed, which is kind of a bummer, but it's okay. The main point here is that now we have OCIO to use, and if we go there and now we select, let's say, sRGB, or better yet, Rec 709 for my monitor right here, now we have at least gotten rid of some of that ugly grayness. We now have more color from our HDR, and this is behaving much better already. But the problem here is that we still don't have a linear workflow. And so let me tell you what I mean by that. Let's go to check out Hubert's textures real quick. So, color management, textures, Hubert. This is what his color map looks like. And remember, this color map has an ICC profile, an sRGB profile, which brings up that gamma. That gamma brightens the image, and that's why this looks proper on my monitor. So, in other words, ICC is doing that. The problem is, though, when we have an ICC embedded 8-bit image right here, or 16, and we go to render that out, well, Redshift is also going to apply a view transform right here. So if we say that we need to do a view transform of sRGB, then we are applying sRGB twice. In other words, we go linear or raw, right? This is what things start out as. And then we apply another transformation, and we've now applied gamma on top of gamma. So we need to figure out how to remove the ICC profile, the sRGB gamma, from this image, so that when we go to do our view transform at the very end right here, it's only happening once. The best way is to use Pico. We've already seen that in action, but the nice thing about Pico is that it's going to transform this image right here using OCIO and ACEs. So remember back to LUTs? Well, that's the magic behind how this works. We want to first of all specify the color space right here. So again, for 8 or 16-bit images, we'll say utility texture sRGB. And our rendering space, In other words, the scene referred data that we want to give redshift exists within ACES CG. So that gets selected down there. Now, for this example, let's just use a JPEG. I'll show you why this is bad later, but for right now, we'll just say JPEG at 100 of quality right there. And after doing so, we end up with this image right here. So we stripped away that ICC. We've gotten rid of that. Let's go ahead and load that now with Hubert. And so we'll go right there. And like so, we bring that in. And after doing that, we end up with this. Everything looks dark. You might think, oh no, everything looks wrong now because the HDR is weird and Hubert's all dark. But don't worry. Remember, our exposure here is at -2 stops. So if we now bring this to 0, our light calculations are much closer towards what they were originally intended for. And now we haven't focused on the HDR, but at least when it comes to these textures, that is much, much more accurate to the original intention that this texture map is trying to express. I also want to emphasize here that it's a really bad idea to, let's say, go to this texture over here and try to change the gamma internally by just doing a gamma override. This is not a good idea. The reason why is because when you use Pico and when you use ACES, it's not only changing the gamma, but it's also changing the gamut. In other words, where those primaries are located. We just went from a sRGB color space into ACES CG. We now have access to that wider range of colors. That's because we used a 3D LUT. It changed those primaries. And again, that's why you want to use this and not a gamma override within the application. In the next video, let's work on the HDR.